The clink of crystal glasses, the shimmer of chandelier light bouncing off the polished marble floor, and the thick perfume of wealth that coated the room like fog. Madeline Carter balanced a tray of champagne flutes in her trembling hands. Before we begin, drop a comment and tell us what would you do in this situation? Be honest, tell me in the comments below. We read every comment. Let's begin. Her heels wobbled slightly, not from instability, but from the sting of humiliation. She wasn't a waitress. She wasn't the help. She was the bride's future sister-in-law. But her family had made it crystal clear, tonight, she was nothing more than a servant. Make sure you refill the bridal table first, her mother hissed in her ear, brushing past her in a navy gown worth more than Madeline's monthly rent. And smile, Maddie. No one wants to see a bitter face around champagne. The tray almost tipped when her brother Brandon's voice rang out. Hey Mads, don't forget to serve our beautiful bride first. She gets the royal treatment, you know. Unlike some people. Laughter followed. Mocking, sharp. The kind that cuts you and leaves no blood. Madeline turned, jaw tight, only to find her future sister-in-law, Kristen Whitmore, reclining in her chair like a bored princess. Careful with the drinks, Kristen said, not even bothering to look up. We wouldn't want you to trip and embarrass yourself. Or worse, spill on someone important. Another round of laughter. Madeline's cheeks flared, but she bit down her tongue so hard she tasted blood. She kept her eyes down, set the glasses neatly on the table, and walked away. She'd promised herself she wouldn't react. That's what they wanted. That's what they always wanted. Be silent. Be small. Be beneath them. She walked the perimeter of the ballroom slowly, keeping her distance, head bowed. But inside, a fire raged. And that fire had a name. Damien Blackwell. She hadn't seen him in 6 months. Hadn't heard a word since he disappeared from her life with nothing but a whisper of a promise that he'd handle things. She doubted he ever would. He was untouchable, CEO of Blackwell Innovations, America's youngest tech billionaire, and the last person her family ever expected her to be linked to. They thought she was broken, disposable, a girl who could barely keep her life together after her father's death and her mother's cold betrayal. They didn't know the truth. They didn't know that she had married Damien Blackwell in secret. They didn't know the papers had already been filed. They didn't know that the man they all worshipped on the news, the man they'd have killed to meet, was hers. Until tonight. Because just as Madeline turned the corner of the ballroom to refill her tray, a silence cut through the music. People turned. The whispers started, quick and frantic. Then the doors flew open. A man in a tailored charcoal suit stepped inside, shoes echoing like thunder. Damien Blackwell, stoic, towering, and furious. Every conversation in the room died. Every eye followed him as he scanned the space like a predator zeroing in on his prey. Then his eyes found her. Madeline froze. He walked straight through the crowd, past guests, past the bridal party, straight to her. And then, in front of her entire family, before the bride could blink or the groom could speak, Damien took Madeline's hand, pulled her close, and whispered, "I'm sorry I'm late, love." Then he kissed her. Gasps echoed. Glasses slipped from hands. Somewhere, someone choked on their drink. But nothing compared to what he said next. Still holding her close, Damien turned to face the silent, horrified crowd. "I'd like to reintroduce you all to my wife, Madeline Blackwell." For a moment, no one breathed. Kristen's lipstick-smeared smile froze like a glitch in a video. Brandon's champagne flute slipped from his fingers and shattered on the polished floor. And Madeline's mother? Her face drained of every ounce of color, like someone had unplugged her from reality. Madeline, however, didn't move. Her hand was still in Damien's. His grip was firm but warm. Grounding. Protective. He didn't waver. Not even when Madeline's brother muttered under his breath, "What kind of sick joke is this?" It wasn't a joke. Madeline's voice finally cracked through the silence, steady and soft, but with a razor's edge. "It's not a joke. We were married 3 months ago. In Manhattan. Quiet ceremony. No media. Just 2 witnesses." She looked directly at her mother. You weren't invited. The words echoed like gunfire in the ballroom. But she's just, Kristen stammered, rising from her seat as if standing made her words more believable. She's a nobody. She was serving drinks 10 seconds ago. Damien turned his eyes on her, and Kristen instantly stepped back, her face twitching with confusion and fear. I asked her to be here anonymously, Damien said calmly. We knew how you'd all treat her. And guess what? You didn't disappoint. He let go of Madeline's hand for a second and stepped forward. The weight of his presence alone had Kristen backing into the decorated backdrop behind the bridal table. Madeline is not beneath anyone in this room, Damien continued, voice colder now. She's the most brilliant, dignified, and loyal person I've ever met. And unlike everyone else here tonight, she doesn't pretend to be someone she's not. Double eight, Brandon said, eyes darting between them. So, you're really married? For real? Damien didn't answer. Instead, he reached into his inner jacket pocket, pulled out a folded document, and handed it to Madeline. She opened it slowly, then raised her chin and announced, "This is the ownership deed to the building you're all standing in right now. Blackwell Holdings purchased it 2 weeks ago." A fresh wave of panic tore through the crowd. A few guests actually moved toward the doors. The bride's parents looked like someone had thrown cold water in their faces. "You're lying," Kristen whispered, voice hoarse. "No, I'm not," Madeline said quietly, then nodded toward Damien. "My husband transferred it under my name." Damien added flatly, "Which means your wedding venue? It's her property now. I'd recommend saying thank you before you get charged for overtime." Laughter bubbled up from somewhere in the crowd. Not everyone, but enough to sting. Kristen's perfect wedding was now hosted in her new sister-in-law's building, the woman she called beneath us. Madeline didn't gloat. She didn't need to. The silence she left behind was far louder. She turned to walk out of the ballroom, the train of her deep blue gown sweeping behind her like royalty, Damien at her side. But she paused at the exit, glanced back, and said to Kristen, "You always said I'd never matter. But tonight? You toasted your marriage under my roof. Enjoy the reception." Then she walked away, her heels clicking like a victory drumbeat across the marble floor. Outside, the night was cool and quiet. Damien opened the car door for her, a sleek black Bentley idling at the curb. She hesitated. "Did I go too far?" she asked. Damien smiled faintly. "Not far enough." The soft leather of the Bentley's back seat still carried her scent when Madeline leaned back, trembling, not from fear, but from the weight of everything she had buried for years suddenly erupting in front of her family's eyes. Damien reached across the console, brushed his fingers along hers. "You are flawless back there," he said, voice low and proud. Madeline closed her eyes, biting down the lump in her throat. "I didn't think I'd be able to say it. I didn't think I'd feel that strong." "You weren't strong," he corrected, turning toward her. "You were unstoppable." The car pulled away from the curb, leaving behind a ballroom of broken egos and spoiled champagne dreams. But for Madeline, it wasn't over. Because the wedding wasn't just the start of a new life for her brother, it had been staged as a funeral for her dignity. Her mother had orchestrated it masterfully. The black sheep daughter, reduced to a background prop, made to serve the bride who once snatched Madeline's internship out of jealousy. It had always been like this. Brandon got the praise. Kristen got the spotlight. Madeline got told to stay in her lane. And tonight, she had until she owned the whole road. The next morning, Madeline sat at the breakfast table in their penthouse apartment overlooking Central Park. The light spilled through the tall glass windows like gold. But it wasn't peace she was feeling. It was something more surgical, focused. Because revenge wasn't the goal anymore. Reinvention was. Her phone buzzed. It was a private number. She answered and heard the nervous voice of her mother. "Madeline, we need to talk. I didn't know. About the marriage. About all of it." Madeline kept her voice even. "You didn't ask." There was silence. Then her mother said, "Do you know how humiliating it was? People are calling me nonstop. Reporters. Business partners. Friends. They're all asking if it's true, if my daughter married Damien Blackwell behind our backs. Madeline didn't blink. Why are you calling, Mom? I just want to understand how this happened. Oh, you mean how your daughter, who you once said would never make it without your guidance, became more powerful than your entire circle? You don't need to be cruel. Madeline smiled tightly. I'm not being cruel. I'm being clear. More silence. I need to see you, her mother finally said. Please. Just lunch. 1 hour. Madeline thought for a long moment, then replied, Fine. But I choose the place. And I don't bring a tray. Later that afternoon, Madeline arrived at Astra, a rooftop restaurant she once dreamed of dining in, back when she was earning $15 an hour at a local cafe, while Kristen strutted around in designer heels pretending to be a self-made woman. Now, the staff bowed when they saw her. Mrs. Blackwell, the maitre d' said, your table is ready. Private terrace. Madeline's mother was already there, dressed elegantly, but clearly shaken. Thank you for coming, her mother said quickly. You look different. Madeline took her seat with grace. I am different. I just wish we could have been part of it. You had your chance, Madeline said calmly, pouring herself a glass of still water. Many, actually. But every time, you chose to shame me, diminish me, serve me last at the table you all feasted at. I never meant for it to get this far, her mother whispered. But it did, Madeline replied. And now the roles have shifted. You're not above me anymore. You're not even beside me. You're behind me. Her mother blinked back tears, but Madeline didn't flinch. Not anymore. I'm not here to fight, her mother said softly. I'm here to ask, is there any way we can repair this? Madeline looked at her for a long moment. Then, gently, she said, You can start by apologizing. Not for yesterday, but for every yesterday before it. That night, as Madeline stood on the balcony of her home, Damien wrapped his arms around her from behind. She called, didn't she? He asked. Madeline nodded. She wants to make things right. Do you? Madeline looked out at the skyline. I want to be right with myself first. He kissed her temple. Then you already are. And behind them, on the table, lay the deed to a new nonprofit Madeline had launched that morning, focused on empowering women from fractured families. Because her story wasn't just a twist of fate. It was a blueprint for something bigger. The sun had barely risen when Madeline stepped into the raw concrete shell of the downtown office space she'd just acquired. The air still smelled of sawdust and drywall. Workers moved around her with curious glances, none of them recognizing the billionaire's wife in her rolled-up sleeves and faded jeans. And that's how she wanted it. Because if there was one thing Madeline had learned, it was this. Power doesn't have to scream. It can walk in quietly and change everything. This office wasn't just a workspace. It was ground zero for the organization she'd secretly begun building 2 years ago, long before Damien, before the marriage, before the world noticed her. It was called Reclaim Her, a nonprofit aimed at giving women from neglected families, abusive relationships, or discarded lives a second chance, education, shelter, jobs, dignity. The irony wasn't lost on her. Once, her family made her feel like a burden. Now she would build a foundation that would help women carry the weight they'd been forced to bear alone. And she wasn't doing it out of spite. She was doing it because no one else had done it for her. Meanwhile, news of the wedding reception incident had gone viral. Some guest had filmed Damien's arrival. The kiss. The announcement. The bride's shocked face. The moment Madeline declared ownership of the building. Within 24 hours, the clip hit 2.7 million views. Comments flooded in. She owned the room, literally. From serving drinks to serving vengeance. That wasn't a wedding. That was an awakening. Madeline didn't read them. Not often. But she felt the ripple through her daily life. Requests for interviews. Invitations to gala events. Brands wanting her to speak at female empowerment panels. She turned them all down. She hadn't done this for applause. She did it because she was done apologizing for existing. Then came the call from Kristen. It was unexpected, unwelcome, but not surprising. Madeline answered. I hope you're enjoying all the attention, Kristen said, her voice already tight with venom. Congratulations. Really? You hijacked my wedding, my day, and made it your comeback story. Madeline paused, then answered simply, no one forced you to humiliate me in front of everyone. You're just bitter because I married Brandon. Madeline laughed, a quiet, tired sound. Kristen, I'm married to Damien Blackwell. Do you really think I'd waste energy being bitter over you? You think money makes you better? No, Madeline said flatly. Respect does. Integrity does. And you've got neither. You were always jealous of me. I pitied you, Madeline corrected. Still do. And with that, she hung up, because not every chapter needs closure. Some need to stay closed so you can write better ones. Later that week, Madeline hosted the soft launch for Reclaim Her. It wasn't extravagant, just a small rooftop gathering with soft lighting and a live acoustic performance by a young woman who had once been homeless and silenced. Now, she stood at the mic with tears in her eyes, singing with strength Madeline could feel in her bones. After the applause, a reporter approached her quietly. Mrs. Blackwell, may I ask what inspired all this? Madeline looked out across the skyline and said, I was once told I'd never be more than background noise. That I was meant to serve others, never lead them. They were wrong. And I'm not here to be seen now. I'm here to make sure no woman ever feels invisible again. She turned back to the reporter with calm fire in her eyes. They tried to erase me. I used that silence to build a voice that echoes louder than they ever imagined. That night, Damien watched her from the doorway of their bedroom as she read emails from women across the country, each one thanking her. Each one pouring their broken stories into her inbox with hope. You okay? He asked gently. Madeline looked up, her eyes wet but shining. I'm more than okay. And for the first time in years, she wasn't surviving. She was becoming. A week later, Madeline stood in front of her childhood home. Same cracked driveway. Same rusted gate. Same silence from the windows. Her mother had asked her to come, just to talk. But Madeline already knew. The shame from the wedding, the gossip, the power shift it had finally sunk in. She rang the bell. No maid answered this time. Her mother opened the door herself, in a worn cardigan. Come in, she said softly. Madeline stepped inside. Nothing had changed. Not the outdated wallpaper, not the picture frames, except the ones with her in them were now back on display. Her mother fidgeted. I saw the news. The foundation. The work you're doing. I never thought. Madeline didn't let her finish. You didn't think I could be more than your disappointment. Her mother lowered her head. I was wrong, she said. I was cruel, and I regret it every day. Madeline stayed quiet. I can't undo what I did, but I want to make peace. Madeline looked around. She didn't feel anger anymore. Just distance. I forgive you, she said. But that doesn't mean we go back to how it was. Tears rolled down her mother's face. And for the first time, Madeline felt free. Outside, Damien waited in the car. When she got in, he looked at her gently. You okay? She nodded. I said what needed to be said. For me. He took her hand. Ready for the fundraiser? Let's go. That night, as she took the stage at her foundation's first major gala, the applause was thunderous. Not because she was a billionaire's wife, but because she was a force of her own. As the lights shone down, Madeline looked across the crowd and smiled. Because the girl who once served drinks at her brother's wedding now raised glasses in rooms full of power. And everyone stood when she walked in.